Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 2 of The Snapshot. We are your hosts. My name is Brendan Patrick, and I'm joined by none other than KMBest. The Snapshot is a Marvel Snap podcast focused on the competitive side of the game, and episode 2 is all about the new season, Savage Land. This week, we saw Zabu released, as well as an upcoming patch note leak with nerfs to Leader, supposedly. The meta has definitely seen a big shakeup over the last few days, and there's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. All right, Cam, how are you doing, sir? It's good to see you again. How was your week?
In Marvel Snap, it was a fairly good one, I would say. I'm infinite now, but the way in which I achieved it left a sort of sour taste in my mouth. I guess on two levels. The first one is my main goal for the season, I think, was not necessarily like to hit a rank, but to do so without getting angry at myself for not hitting it fast enough. Because I know that, like, as irrational as it is, there are tons of other streamers out there, and part of my appeal is that I'm playing the game at the high level, that I am trying to win all these games, and I don't play enough to hit it early. I stream about 4 hours a day, and that sounds like a ton of time. But when you look at the people who are streaming alongside me, like I know Dara streamed for like 12 hours in one day, and it's like, dog, that's as much as I played in 3. And it's just like, oh my god, I have to compete with this.
Yeah.
And so the early seasons are always really tough for me because it's a race between my like degen gamer brain, which wants to just like play for 24 hours, and my understanding that if I do that, I will drive myself completely insane. And so my goal for this season was just to get less upset than I did last season, which I did achieve. I did get less upset than I did last season. I didn't do perfectly, but I did okay. And you got to take the small victories when they're there. But the second thing that left a sour taste in my mouth was that I bought Zabu. I was like, let's play some awesome Zabu decks. And then I realized that all my Zabu decks sucked ass without Darkhawk.
Yep.
That was really unfortunate. So I was like, okay, we can go buy Darkhawk, because I foolishly spent all my tokens on Null before Galactus happened. And then we had to wait for Darkhawk to show up in the shop. And then we had to wait for me to be able to spend enough money to get Darkhawk. And then when I got Darkhawk, it was very easy. It's like, wait, what's going on here? And it's not like to be clear, it's not like I'm exactly in the ELO bracket or the money bracket where I'm playing Darkhawk against opponents who don't have it. But I'm sure that does happen. Like, I probably see more of it than anyone else because I'm in the high end of ELO and the high end of spending. And matchmaking is based on MMR and your collection level, right? So I probably see it more than anyone else. But it still sort of feels like it devalues the accomplishment that I was just like, I'm going to go buy this. And if you don't have it, I'm probably doing something stronger than you.
Yeah.
And there's no way for you to get it in time. So, sorry.
We're definitely going to dig into that with how these Zabu lists tended to converge on kind of a multitude of Series 4 and Series 5 cards. Darkhawk obviously being the most important, but we saw Shuri make it into some of those lists, as well as Absorbing Man. And those cards, if you looked at a deck list and it had, and I know that that Shuri and Absorbing Man are replaceable to an extent, but if you looked at a deck list as an aspiring player and you're trying to put it together and you saw Darkhawk, Absorbing Man, and Shuri in it, that is very prohibitive. Darkhawk is the corner piece, but yeah, that's something we're definitely going to get into in this episode. Is sort of I saw you named your deck list Gossip Girl, actually, because it was so freaking expensive. And
also because you can't
have it. Yeah,
yeah, it is so expensive, and you can't have it. That is the key. It is extremely expensive, and also like 99% of people are not allowed to have that.
Yeah, and speaking to sort of the early season pressure for you to hit a specific rank, usually just infinite, right? Because that is a thing that can kind of go in the title card, adds a little bit of like advertisement.
Yep.
It's a rough mental cycle. I would draw parallels to the sort of physical card game tournament scene where people are pressured to sort of plus EV on things like Grand Prix or things like Callings and Flesh and Blood. So you'll have sunk costs like flying to the tournament, hotel, etc., and opportunity costs of not working or something like that. And you look at that tournament like, I need to recoup this, and it leads to just a very unpleasant experience most of the time, and it's hard to get out to. And I think that ladder actually is sort of the full realization of that unpleasant experience. It's like that times 10, right? Because you're pressured to hit this rank in a short period of time, and it just kind of leads into a vicious cycle. So I totally feel you there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something I think people spend a ton of time working on their ability to play the game at a mechanical level, and not nearly enough time working on their ability to process their own emotions while they play the game. I mean, there may be some people out there who are immune to tilt, but I'll be honest, I think that is an absolute myth, just based on like the existence of the poker scene. I think the idea that someone is immune to tilt is unlikely, and that you need to work on your mental game the same way you need to work on your physical game, or not your physical game. I guess mechanical game would be 100%.
But you're 100% correct. Like, mental game is something that is very underappreciated. You won't see it crop up as much when during this time before major tournaments are released, but when they start running tournaments for Marvel Snap, which we're going to talk about because Ben Brode actually mentioned friendly battles coming very, very soon. That is when you will see mental game shine. Like, people that actually can focus on staying, in the game, and not getting tilted. It's super important. But with that, let's go ahead and get into the news. So like I said, the Savage Land did release, so that is the addition of Zabu. Zabu is a 3-cost, 2-power card that says ongoing. Your 4-cost cards cost 2 less. We did do a little bit of theory crafting last episode on the impact of Zabu. I think we maybe undershot it a little bit, but what's interesting about Zabu in the card design space is that it does have that, make your X cards cost less, which is always a fine line to walk. And I think that, I thought that the 4-cost card clause would be a bit narrow and maybe it wouldn't work and it'd be a bit high variance, right? You feel like you have to draw Zabu on turn 3 or something like that. I think that Zabu exceeded the power level that I expected, but that is because it's working so well with cards like Darkhawk and, early in the season, so like the first kind of 4 or 5 days, you probably still see it on ladder. There's a lot of Spider-Man, these Spider-Man kind of locking out with absorbing man, so locking down 2 lanes on turn 5. But sort of I would say my conclusion is Zabu is very, very powerful and huge impact on the meta so far. Like I said, the friendly battles is going to be launching at near the end of the season. That's all Ben really said in an interview, but that's great for us. Friendly battles does mean tournaments. It does mean kind of an expansion of what Marvel Snap is, especially for us who play the game more or on the quote unquote what we consider to be competitive side. That will kind of reach its full realization when friendly battles does finally come out. So very, very excited, and that should be coming towards the end of the Savage Land. I want to break into this patch leak, which was actually supposed to go live. I think it was on like Wednesday or something like that, but it got pushed. Just some highlights. KM leader -1 power, and keep in mind, everybody, this could change because they did postpone it. Leader -1 power, Arrow -1 power, and Nova Galactus -1 power. These are the highlights for me, but I want to get your thoughts on the leader nerf specifically, KM.
I actually wanted to revisit the Zabu.
Okay, go for it.
I wanted to, because you said we undershot the power. I'm not sure we did. I think, with all due respect, you might have undershot the power, but basically the scenario I laid out as this is the worst possible thing that can happen with Zabu is kind of what we're seeing playing out right now. Where it's just like, okay, it's a Zabu mirror. I didn't draw Zabu. GG. It's a Zabu mirror, but they spent 6,000 tokens on Darkhawk. GG. Like that is, I honestly wanted to ask you for your help trying to articulate this, because to me it feels like Zabu sort of accidentally revealed a significant flaw in Marvel Snap's monetization to me, where, okay, there will be a new card coming out every month. It might not be as strong as Zabu, but the designers are not gods. They cannot foresee anything. I don't think they thought, let's release Zabu and then, oh, look, we have 2 incredibly powerful 4-cost cards that cost 6,000 tokens. We're going to screw the player base over and make them pay for that. I don't think they thought that. I just think they were like, I just think they didn't realize that like the best 4-cost cards are currently 6,000 collector tokens.
Yeah.
And like, that's normal. It would be normal for them to not realize something like that, because like, what? It's not really the kind of thing you think of Like when these cards are being developed or tested, it's just like, but to us, to me at least, that is the most dominant thought that I have about Zabu is, man, he's expensive.
Yep.
Man, that card is expensive.
I think there's a hyper focus on the Zabu decks and the Zabu decks that are performing right now because it's so early in the season and it's the new shiny card. The weird thing about the Zabu deck is that when I try to think about, okay, let's say I can't afford that deck, and I think the Darkhawk is critical to running that deck to its the power level that it's succeeding at on the ladder. But the sort of next thought would be what counters it. What are my other options in terms of decks that I can play?
Yeah.
Against the Zabu deck, because it has sort of slotted into that good stuff deck, right? We're seeing top end arrow, top end leader. It's hard for me to be. I'm not seeing a deck that's just like this counters Zabu. I really don't. And I could be wrong there, but that is actually different than the good stuff deck we had of last season, where it was very much focused on get priority, top end arrow, top end leader. Patriot was kind of it was decent to get that deck. It was good. Yeah.
You could play
Zabu,
Patriot.
I don't know, because it keeps that top end, but then also is exploding onto the board, playing, multiple 4-cost cards in a single turn. That's the hardest thing for me is I don't see a way to counter it.
I think right now the best ways I've thought of to counter it are just like you play Silver Surfer, or you play like a negative deck, and you're just like, look, you put a lot of points on the board. I put way more points on the board. And like that, the reason that feels so bad is like, well, okay, what if the best way to counter this card is Silver Surfer? And you started this game today. And now Silver Surfer, you literally cannot acquire.
Yep.
And like that's like also a bad scenario, because I do think the Silver Surfer decks are still extremely strong. I think they are still very, very powerful things to be doing. But man, what happens if you want to build that now? Because like that's like a pretty solid budget deck. If you were playing last month and bought the battle pass, that's all you really need. It's the battle pass card and 3 pool 3 and then pool 3s. But if you don't have that, and that's sort of where I'm at, where it's like I want to spend the next few days making actual budget decks because they need to exist if this game is going to survive. That's kind of where I'm at. There needs to be options that people can play and access, or they need to do something.
I'm a big fan of Marvel Snap's free-to-play model, their card acquisition model, all up until the point where you want to become competitive. And that's a very loaded word, so it's kind of whatever that word means. But if you do want to be able to sort of adapt your deck building strategy and have similar cards to the people you're playing at higher ranks, like that's where I really feel like Marvel Snap's card acquisition model breaks down, because the Series 5 cards are so prohibitively freaking expensive that, I mean, it's obviously designed that you can't have them all. But because of that, you are going to end up in some very feels bad scenarios, which, it may be somewhat unjust, right? Maybe I wouldn't say the meta is solved yet, so maybe there's a deck that kind of does well against Zabu.
Absolutely. Like, this is all preliminary. I want to be clear about this. This is all preliminary. I don't even know if Zabu is that good, but if it is that good and these cards are needed to run it, that's a very big problem.
So I would like to, I would like them to adjust that scenario and that situation. And I don't really have a solution for it off the top of my head, but Series 5 cards like that being as prohibitive as they are and potentially as impactful as they are is a rough scenario for the people at the sort of latter end of the game, at the infinite ranks or that are putting a lot of time into it. And I just don't like that it feels that sometimes being high rank is somewhat synonymous with whaling at this point. And that's tough. Yeah. That's tough.
Yeah, and like that devalues the rank. Like, I used to be able to like just say, all right, look, if you don't have very many cards, you can play a Dino deck and you could probably beat me. And I don't know if that's true anymore. Like, I'm not saying it's not true. I haven't, like, Dino's like number 1 on the list of decks I need to run into this Darkhawk gauntlet, right? But it used to be unquestionably one of like the 3 or 4 best decks in the game. And now it's at least questionably that, right? Without that option, like that was like my default. People come to my channel and ask like, hey, this is my collection. What can I play? And the answer was almost always some kind of Dino, unless they had one of the tentpole builder rounds in series 3. And now I can't even know for sure if I can recommend that, because I mean, I know I'm not playing it. Like, I don't know if that means it's bad, but there used to be, up until exactly the release of Zabu, there were plenty of Series 3 only decks that I thought were deeply competitive with even the most whaling decks. And now, I mean, there could be. I'm not sure there aren't, but I'm not confident enough in any of them to recommend them. And I need to spend time with them to make sure that I am. And maybe, you know, maybe that's overblown, right? Maybe you can still play Sarah. Maybe you can still play Devil Dinosaur, and people are just seduced by the new hotness. And I really hope that's true.
Well, let's put a pin in that one. Circle back next week after you do your budget deck sort of exploration. And as the meta, you know, starts to level out a bit, and maybe, you know, people pop off the Zabu decks and start trying stuff out to counter that. I want to go into these patch notes that were leaked on this. I think it was on some Korean website or something like that, and it said, I just want to really focus on the leader nerf, the quote unquote nerf. So leader -1 power. Do you think that is an effective nerf, and are you happy? Okay.
No.
So what is your issue with that?
I am happy though.
Okay.
No, I'm actually overjoyed that they didn't nerf the card. Because at this point, I think the closest thing to a pool 3 only deck that I know is good is Leech Leader. So, like, I hate to break it to you, but he's the good guy now. He's the free to play warrior. All right. He's the guy who is here to save you from this onslaught of bullshit. And here's the thing. This is the leader thing is actually really important to note, because the reason why Darkhawk and Shuri are so important in the deck is because they break leader symmetry. If your opponent has more cards in their deck than you, your Darkhawks will be bigger than theirs. If your opponent has priority before your Shuri'd item flips, they will get a normal version and you will get the Shuri'd version. These both help you break leader symmetry. And that, like, the fact that, like, the sixth, like, there's no way they could have predicted that. That's why this is such an accident. But, like, both of these cards help you beat the card that is good against your deck. And, like, they're both extremely expensive. And it's like, wait, there's no way you thought this would happen, but it did. Right? And so, as far as not nerfing leader, leave him alone. Fucking buff leader, dude. Like, that card is in Series 3. Like, I at this point, I am totally against nerfing any card in Series 3 or below forever. Like, I refuse to acknowledge that should happen. Buff them all.
Let's just acknowledge that within 7 days, Leader went from the bad guy, the ultimate villain in Marvel Snap, to a full-on redemption arc as the free-to-play hero.
No, he's a hero now. Leader's a hero now. Leader is your free-to-play god. Leader is the best free-to-play card. Do not nerf the best free-to-play card. It's like nerfing Devil Dinosaur, which has happened several times. Don't do it. Buff them. Give Devil Dinosaur an extra power. Give Leader an extra power. I don't want to hear this anymore. Like, until we have a deck that competes with this whale garbage, I don't want any nerfs to any pool 3 cards anymore. And I say this acknowledging, a little jokingly, that what I'm saying is not a viable business model, because most of the people aren't going to be playing against the whale garbage, but they are going to be playing against Leader, and they should balance for people who are having a bad experience against Leader, and it is totally fine to do. But man, if you're like mid pool 3 with a high elo, the only card you want is Leader. There's nothing else you can play. Like, he goes in everything. He's so good against these decks. And it's tough, because at the highest levels of collection and MMR, Leader has plenty of counters now because of the preponderance of Darkhawk, because of the preponderance of Shuri. But most people aren't going to run into that, right? Most people are just going to be like collection level 1500 and get leadered and look at that and be like, oh, that's bullshit. Like, so I guess maybe you have to hit him. I don't know. But man, it is very odd that I don't think they should balance, for me, to be clear. So, like, but if I had my magical little silo of Marvel Snap, I would not nerf Leader. Obviously, they have to balance for everybody who isn't me, and that means they probably should.
Yeah, well, I mean, luckily they did the potential nerfs that are coming are very slight. You know, they didn't listen to kind of the mob that was calling for leader deletion or rework and things like that. So probably a good decision. We'll see as those nerfs.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that, right?
That
didn't Ben Brode say that like this was just sort of a placeholder?
Exactly.
While they debated larger
exactly.
changes?
So they didn't overreact.
So we don't know that they're not going to.
Yeah, well, it's like, that they didn't overreact, right? And I think that's good. You know, because a lot of the sort of sentiment and narrative going into this potential patch was that leader needed kind of like massive changes, right? It was a huge issue with the game, and I think that Second Dinner responded correctly, especially in the context of how the meta has switched with the release of Savage Land.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Agreed.
All right, so into our Bend and Snap listener question section. We actually do have a question this time, KM, and this is from YouTube with user 0is9. They say, how would you incorporate the new battle mode in a tournament setting? Would it be single limb? If not single limb, would you allow players to switch decks in between rounds? Do you think organizers should implement house rules like banning a card even if it's playable in the game, so maybe Series 5 cards? But the tourney organizer feels that it's healthy. So what could they ban cards to make it more, increase the competitive integrity, basically? It's a lot of questions, Cam, but just give me your vision of potentially how you see tournaments actually working out just in general.
I would think that if you are I don't have a specific vision. There are a couple sort of guidelines I would want to follow if I was a tournament organizer, though. The first is I would want them to be fast. You are playing a game called Marvel Snap. That means that you should not be waiting around for pairings for like as long as it takes for a game to play. So whatever platform they're on, it should be a speedy one. Whatever situation you find yourself in, it should be a speedy one. Like these games are 5 minutes. If I'm waiting 5 minutes for a 5-minute game, what are we doing here? I think the other one would be banning cards because of collectability issues feels like more reasonable to me than banning cards because people feel they're unhealthy. If you want to ban a card because you just think, the existence of Series 5 is complete garbage or whatever, and I know there are plenty of people who do think that. You just want to ban all Series 5 cards, go off. But if you, as a tournament organizer, are someone who's just like, I always lose to Galactus, let's ban Galactus, I think that shit sucks. Be fair with your bans and don't just ban the cards that beat the things you play on ladder, basically. And I worry that unless bans are blanket, no Series 5 cards, no Series 4 cards, things like that, then they would lead to just a rash of sort of vaguely unprofessional tournament organizers just banning cards they don't like. Yeah. And I think that would be an unpleasant scenario to allow.
Yeah, and it's very unlikely to happen. I mean, there's been potential for tournament organizers to do that kind of thing in pretty much every digital card game, even physical card game, and it just doesn't happen on the aggregate.
Yeah, it doesn't happen because it's ridiculous. But with Marvel Snap, the sentiment, if you ran a no leader tournament 2 weeks ago, I bet that would play.
More people would join that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet that would play.
In terms of format, so single limb, non-single limb, I'm not sure if this is exactly how battle mode works. I can't remember because it's kind of off the cuff. I'm picking it out of my brain. But this idea of you have this 10 cube pool against the other player, and that's sort of how you're playing. I don't know if we need to look at the exact number of 10, but I do think that's probably the most effective way to do it. So you can keep this snapping thing in, the snapping concept of Marvel Snap in tournaments is that you have a set number of cubes before you go into this match against this other player. And you basically play till you lose those. They'll have to implement something so that, your opponent can't snap you when they only have 1 cube to wager, and then they've snapped you to try to get more cubes from you, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure they code that into the client. I do think that's probably the best way to do 1v1 in Marvel Snap in a tournament scenario is we both start with a set number of cubes, and whoever wins them all wins, basically.
I do want to highlight one issue, though, and it's the issue of rope snapping. The way Marvel Snap works is once you lock in your play, it is locked in. And if your opponent snaps you after you have locked in your play, sorry, tough luck. And what that incentivizes is, if you're going to do something that if you snap, it is pretty telegraphed, what you should do is wait until the very end of the turn, snap, make the play, and hope that your opponent has already locked in a play that loses to your very telegraphed. Like, let's say you're in a position where arrow leader wins and you have arrow and leader, right? What you're supposed to do is wait as long as possible so they don't think, oh, why would they snap on turn 5? They must have arrow and leader. They'll have already made their play. And the frustrating bit about this is the counterplay to this is you're just supposed to wait every turn. You are supposed to burn the rope every single turn. Wait the entire time that you are allotted every single turn. And if there are actual stakes, like very few people do this on ladder, thank God. But if there are actual stakes, that is what optimal play looks like. And that sucks.
Yeah. I'm happy you brought that up because that sounds like it is definitely not intentional for a tournament setting, because you are 100% correct. That is how it works. And people don't take advantage of that on ladder because they're playing ladder, right? And the stakes are low. And that would be a painful thing to do. And it would probably a little too try hard. But yeah, in a tournament setting, that would absolutely happen. And that is a weird thing. Like right after you've locked in your play, they can snap you and then you can't change it. It absolutely should be changed for tournament play. I'm happy you brought that up. That's a fantastic point.
Yeah, the classic example I use is like you're playing a deck that wants to play Professor X on 5. You're never snapping early. You always just wait and hope they make a play that loses to Professor X on 5. Because if you snap, they're like, oh, they have Professor X. Yeah. This is like a very like. I think it matters more weirdly at like lower levels of play, or my level of play where I'm on stream and I just forget what people can play, and then they'll snap and I'll be like, oh, that's why they're snapping, even though I should have been playing around that already. But still, like, it's not a good mechanic to exist.
Yeah, it seems unintentional it's at least in a tournament setting. It seems like that would be fully unintentional and should be fixed. I would say fix is probably the correct word for that. So.
If you want to ban anything from a tournament setting, that would be it.
So yeah, that's our bend and snap scenario. That's our listener question section of the pod. If you want to get your question read out on next week's podcast, comment in the YouTube comments below. Multiple use of comments. But yeah, shoot us a question there. We'll read it out in the pod. We'll mention your name. And I love doing this because this is something that probably wouldn't have made it into the pod. And that's what you brought up was a part of tournament play that I kind of knew existed, but had completely forgot about, and that has major implications if it does make it through to that tournament play. So let's get into the main topic. We talked about this a little bit in the news. It's going to be all about Zabu. We're going to talk about how to build it, popular decks, basically what the infinite ladder is looking like right now. But let's start a bit zoomed out. Cam, just give me the breakdown of meta implications if you could sum it up. I know we talked about it a bit in the news, but Zabu looks like it is making a huge impact, is usually coupled with Darkhawk, let's say that, but it has emerged as what I would consider to be the top or the best deck. Would you agree?
No, probably not necessarily. I still think we're in like the new tool, new toy phase, where everyone's just like, all right, this card does obviously strong things. But like, it's not like it does obviously strong things without a cap or anything, right? Like, the most oppressive thing it can do is play a bunch of stats. And, like, that's not that bad. It's just that, like, in the context of, these arrow leader decks, it's like, oh, man, you played a bunch of stats and now you're ahead forever. Like, that's where it sucks, right? Where you're just like, aha, I have cleverly played Zabu into Darkhawk and Rockslide into arrow and leader. Nice game. Hope you had fun, all right? Like, that's where it sucks. And I think there is something to the idea that, like, Darkhawk actually opens you up to people breaking leader symmetry with Shang-Chi, things like that. Shang-Chi and Enchantress. Like there's the deck's not unbeatable. It's just like a good stuff mid-range deck with like some extra explosive power, or most of the Zabu decks. I think actually the most oppressive thing on a game-to-game basis the Zabu decks do is double Spider-Man. It's just that only ever wins 2 cubes. Like that never actually wins more than 2 cubes. It is actually impossible for that to happen.
And we saw Dr. Doom
I've never seen it happen. Like that's the most oppressive thing they do. But like the cube system sort of inherently balances that, because it's like, do you really want to put those 2 cards in your deck for a chance to win 2 or 1 cubes, and then every other time you draw them, they are worthless. Like, it's like they are balanced in that sense. And like, I don't know. It's an interesting spot because like you have to build your deck with a bunch of 4-drops, but you also have to build your deck to function without Zabu. And there are different ways of doing this. And I don't necessarily think it's the strongest thing in the game. I think, I wouldn't be shocked if we came to the conclusion that Surfer was just the best deck in the game still. Or if we came to the conclusion that, I don't know, pick any of the decks from last month even, I still wouldn't be shocked if one of them was good. Surfer is probably the front runner for non-Zabu deck right now for me, but that's just vibes.
So after playing it only 4 hours and all, like you said last week, but hitting Infinite, do you think that the meta feels fresh compared to where it was before the season drop?
Yeah. There's just a bunch of people trying stuff. And that's always fun. Now, would I be saying that if I hadn't farmed all those people trying stuff with my $300 card? Maybe not. Like, I don't know. Like, it's hard. The number one, there's a famous post that talks about how, like, the number one predictor of whether or not you enjoyed a game was whether or not you won it. Like, we're really bad at telling what fun is outside of our experience of winning and losing. And so I don't think I can really make a judgment because I've been doing a lot of winning recently. Mm-hmm. Like, I have been farming. It's been easy. And that's not, like, not to say I've never, like, had lost streaks and gotten upset or anything, but, like, on the whole, this climb was easier than last month's. And I gotta imagine that's because of the $300 I spent on 2 cards.
Do you think that Arrow and Leader are still going to make it into the top end of most of these mid-range decks? Because I mean, so Zabu is fresh, right? It's putting a lot of 4-cost cards in our decks and giving us a sort of new way to play with those. But I do find that a lot of these decks are including the top end of Leader and of Arrow, which are sort of it feels pretty similar, samey in how the deck will play on those 5 to 6, that 5 and 6 turn if it's ahead, right? Exploiting Leader after winning 2 lanes. Do you think that we're going to see those cards exist as the top end curve moving forward? Do you think that that's just kind of like the best thing you can be doing on turn 5, turn 6 if you're a mid range deck? If you're not one of these synergistic decks like Patriot or like Surfer, things like that.
Sort of depends on what else develops, right? Arrow, I think, is just always going to be good. Arrow is always going to be good. She's always going to be in decks. She's always going to be one of the best 5-drops in the game. That's just how it is. She does something incredibly powerful. So unless boards are getting incredibly full very early, Arrow is going to be good. Now, that's not like an impossible thing to happen. It's just that they've taken great pains to make early board flood a very punishable thing. So for now, I think Arrow is much safer as like a card that's going to be good forever than Leader. Leader A is in line for another nerf, and B is a little weak to things like Surfer, a little weak to things like Mystique, and conflicts a lot with wanting to run tech cards in your Zabu deck. Like, for example, I'm running Zabu with Leader and Arrow right now. I don't really know if that's right. Like, I could be running Shang-Chi and Enchantress or something like that, and having better Zabu turns, or really just playing them to swing boards. Like, the more you're reliant on big things from Shuri and Darkhawk, the worse you get blown out by opposing Shang-Chi's. Like, there's definitely something to that. I also noticed that some of the decks that the deck I played was weakest to were just decks that played like Shuri into Red Skull. It's like, oh, I actually just lose to 30 points. I actually just can't beat 30 points in 2 lanes. So like, there are definitely decks that can do things. Like, if you're putting 30 points in 2 lanes, it's actually pretty hard for a non-Shang-Chi Leader Arrow deck to get.
Do you think that Zabu feels high variance? Like, does it feel like the games you win? So games you win feel like draw Zabu, win the game, and the games you lose are like, okay, I didn't draw Zabu, so I'm just going to retreat and take my cube loss.
I built my deck to be as low variance as possible. The Zabu deck that I'm playing, where it's just like, okay, I didn't draw Zabu. That's fine. I didn't draw Zabu. I'm just going to play like Shuri arrow leader, and that's going to be good enough like 60% of the time. And that's like I built my deck for that. It's important to note though that like in Snap, I'm not sure that's optimal. Maybe you're just supposed to go like -1 +8. But I lose my actual mind if I lose like 4 games in a row, regardless of the cube ratio. So I build a lot of my decks to just be functional. I build for baseline rather than explosion.
Yeah, that's something I would like to dive into at a later point too. Probably its own topic. Its own topic itself is the game theory in Marvel Snap and how that sort of changes deck building. You know, like you said, losing the 1 cube versus like if you lose, let's say you lose 4 games in a row, but you're losing 1 cube on each, and then you win the 4 cuber, you win the 8 cuber, your cube rate could be higher. And yeah, so maybe incentivizing higher variance decks at that. What do you think about the Zabu mirror? Is it something that you think it could do for the rest of the month, or is it pretty painful?
No, it sucks. The Zabu mirror is exactly as bad as you think it is. It's exactly as bad as it sounds. But there is the added wrinkle of like, okay, they drew Zabu. What if they just don't draw their 4s? Like, it's not like you actually lose. It's just like, you know, you lose to the nut draw if you don't have it, right? That's kind of every card game, I suppose. But like the Zabu mirror, it feels more painful. But like there are like games where they'll go like, all right, here's my turn 3 Zabu, and then their turn 4 play is like an armor and a white queen, and it's like, wait, you actually just played like a 3/5 and a 4/6. So like, that's not actually good. Like you could have just played Mr. Fantastic into White Queen and that would have been more points. But like when they really do the thing, when they really go off, then it feels very bad.
I know you're going to be exploring this a lot over this coming week, but if you had to pick some decks to be playing right now that weren't Zabu, to compete at that higher end of the ladder, maybe just we'll say in infinite rank right now, what decks would come to mind initially? So these are Surfer. Okay, so we talked about Surfer, right?
Surfer is number 1 with a bullet. When you talk about decks that can put like 30 power in 2 lanes, Surfer can't do 30, but it can do like 20 in 3. Like that's fine. It can pick its spots well because it's a Sarah deck. You do need to commit Brood a little early, which can be rough, but you are at the very least competitive. The place I would look for dealing with these decks is decks that point slam well and don't get absolutely demolished by Shang-Chi and Enchantress. And Surfer is that, right? There's also, say, you know, like the Red Skull decks, but those kind of need Shuri. And also, they have a tendency to get demolished by Shang-Chi. And it's hard to not expect a deck like that to play Shang-Chi. A deck like Zabu to play Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi is, I think, the more applicable of the 2 tech cards most of the time. And that is the one I would expect more than Enchantress. And so if you're setting yourself up to be like, haha, my large 30 power idiot, and you don't have a Cosmo in that lane, you're going to lose that lane. Like, that's happening. Outside of that, I am interested to see how just normal Sarah works. I'm interested to see how Dino works. I'm interested to see how, like, budget Zabu discard decks work. Zabu control lists with, like, Spider-Man and, let's say, you know, none of the Series 5 cards, none of the Series 4 cards, things like that.
Goose.
Outside of that, though, I'm a little worried. Like, I'll be honest with you, I am a little bit worried.
Well,
because all the things that the metagame used to be like, you know, okay, there's this thing at the top, the Leech Leader good stuff deck, what we run Shuri and Vision in it instead of Leech or whatever. Like, there's this thing at the top, but it's not like it's unbeatable. It's competing on a similar power level as everything else. And I think something needs to come along to be able to deal with these other decks. I think at some point there will be like a realization that, oh wait, Surfer can just go just as big. And then it becomes like a Surfer meta again, and then suddenly things start moving. Hopefully. I don't know if that's true though. You know? I'm a little worried.
Well, let's if you think you're worried now, let's close it out with a spicy one. I'll ask you, how important is Darkhawk?
That dude's important. At the highest levels of play, finding ways to break leader symmetry is important. So when that becomes less important, he'll be less important. But right now, you can play Darkhawk and he's just like a 4/11 on average with like a Korg or a Rock Slide, and it's just like, oh, well, that's like a big number. that's a lot of stats for not a lot of cost. Yeah. It reminds me of when Devil Dinosaur was a 4 cost card. It's just like, oh, that's just like the biggest guy at 4. And that's actually what, like, Darkhawk is not like, oh my god, he's so good, he's amazing, he's the best. It's just that, like, okay, is there a better stat stick at 4? Not really. Like, what, you're gonna play Crossbones? That's just Darkhawk, but worse.
Way worse.
and it's like it's really just that, like, it's just one of the best in slot 4s. And it allows you to play Rock Slide, who is, I think, actually a very good card, and not feel bad about it. And that's also really good. Because the rock stuff matters. And, you know, if you're playing Rock Slide, suddenly he's like a 410 with Darkhawk. And she's like, oh, we have like cards that have stats now. Because Zabu is supposed to be balanced. I think Zabu is actually probably 100% balanced if those two cards don't exist. If you still have to play like Series 3 and below 4 costs, that card's barely even good. You're talking about like Jessica Jones. Like, that you can deal with. You can deal with like 3 Jessica Joneses. That's beatable. You can outpoint slam that. But suddenly they're doing other stuff and they're using it as setup for Arrow Leader, and then we're in trouble. And again, I don't think the deck is as good as people say it is, but it does do some things that do not feel good. And Darkhawk is a big part of that. He's just best in slot.
Yeah, I agree with you. So if you looked at Crossbones as like an option, I mean, it is way worse, considering the sort of conditions you have to meet to play Crossbones. Let's go into Decklist, Cam, and talk about how to build it. So I have I'm gonna, by the way, if you're listening on Spotify or anything like that, if you want to go to the YouTube video, we will be flashing these deck lists on the screen. But Cam, I think I have your initial Zabu deck list here, which you probably used to climb pretty far, and the evolution of that, which was Gossip Girl. Talk to me a little bit about V1 here, and then how you made the decision, what card you swapped out to get to version 2 with the Shuri and stuff like that in it.
So what happened was, with version 1, what I did was just like, all right, what I'm going to do here is just put like a bunch of broken Darkhawk and Zabu things in with typical good stuff shell of, you know, Scorpion, Armor, Lizard, Arrow, Leader, like, I'm a genius. I did it. It's awesome. And then I was thinking later that day, I'm not even sure this version is worse than the other version that I was playing, the Gossip Girl deck. Because I did notice that the Gossip Girl deck, I really missed Shang-Chi. Like, once you take Shang-Chi out of this, you basically guarantee that you lose to Shuri, Red Skull, Taskmaster 100% of the time. You have actually no answers in the entire deck to that. It just doesn't exist. And so, you know, because my metagame is so warped, there's like, I play against a player, I play against them 4 times in a row, and it's Shuri, Red Skull every time. And it's like, oh, well, I mean, yeah, okay. I actually lose that 100% if you just draw the cards. So I think the thought process with the first one is just, these are the 5 best these are the 5 best 4-cost cards. We're going to play them. Spider-Man, Absorbing Man, Darkhawk, and Rock Slide, and then Shang-Chi. Yeah. And then the rest of it was just, you know, let's put good cards in the deck. And then I was like, there's a little bit of conflict here. A, Spider-Man, Absorbing Man only ever wins me 2 cubes. B, Shang-Chi and Leader want to be played on the same turn. So in order to alleviate that, I was like, all right, what if we just cut them and just ran a bunch of good stuff instead? And that's how we ended up with the deck that I'm calling Gossip Girl. Shuri, not very good, honestly, but it's not like I have any better ideas. And White Queen is just, I love her.
The information is definitely non-zero on White Queen. I think that is one of the most underappreciated things. That info is so good.
I love her so much. She just has good stats, but not so good that you have to worry about dying to a tech card. She gives you a card. That's awesome. Great. Outstanding card. I might be the biggest White Queen fan. Once you put her in a deck, it is so hard to take her out of a deck, because she is never going to be bad. She is never going to be like, God, I wish I had something other than White. You play White Queen, you're happy every time. And like, I don't know if that makes her good or if that makes her a trap. But if it is a trap, I am in the trap. I have fallen for the trap.
Yeah. I'm also in the trap of White Queen. My favorite 4-drop, I think, at this point. Obviously, Darkhawk is creeping up there.
She does everything you want. She does everything you want.
What would you say are some of the key play lines of the deck that maybe some people miss, right? You talked about Spider-Man Absorbing Man, which I think is good. If you just looked at this list vanilla, you might not immediately notice, like, oh, we play Spider-Man so that we can also play Absorbing Man and lock down 2 lanes. Like, that is very powerful. Is there anything else, like any other key lines that you think people might be missing when playing this deck?
Honestly,
it's kind of straightforward,
really.
Right?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You play good cards, and then some of the games you draw Zabu, and then when you draw Zabu, you do something incredibly stupid on turns 4 and 5, and then you're probably ahead, so you're probably going to win when you play leader.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. Like, you do just some incredibly stupid garbage when you just like, all right, well, what are we going to do? We're going to play Zabu? Okay, what are we playing Zabu into? I don't know. Rock Slide Absorbing Man. There's 4 rocks. Oh, here's a Darkhawk. He has 17 power. Like, that's kind of just the deck. I mean, like, there's obviously the same nuances that a normal Marvel Snap deck will have, right? In terms of, like, you know, where do I think my opponent's card is going to go, and how do I set up my lanes such that leader wins them for me, or arrow wins them for me? Which of them am I playing towards, right? Like, there's stuff like that. But mostly you're just playing cards.
Yeah.
Mostly you just there are cards in your hand, and then you put them on the board, and then you win the game.
Pretty common for mid-range to be. So I think something a lot of people will be used to.
This is Jund.
Exactly this.
This is Jund, right? Like, this is just like I'm casting Blightning here. I'm getting a bunch of value. Can you beat it? And then see, yeah, okay.
All right, so let's go talk about some other deck lists from other content creators and stuff I've seen crop up on Twitter. I have some takes that are a lot different from what you did, and then some that are quite similar. So the first one I have here is from Dara, which is obviously a very similar list, but he has opted to play both Cosmo and Enchantress, 2 reactive and tech cards. What do you think about this list? Do you think that this is kind of needed in the current ladder environment, or just an option if you want to be playing on that more reactive side and kind of be blowing out your opponent with those tech cards?
I'm too stupid to play Cosmo in this deck. Like, that's
play
really
Cosmo, hurt yourself.
I'm too stupid to. Yes, like, I will Cosmo myself. I'm too stupid to do that. I am not about to put myself in a scenario where I'm like, I'm gonna win the game with this arrow. Oh, shit, I'm gonna win the game with this leader. Oh, I'm gonna win the game with this Spider-Man. I'm like, every card in the deck, man. Like, there are 2 cards in the deck that are not on reveal, and they are Zabu and Darkhawk. Other than Cosmo, right? Every other card, your Cosmo turns off your own shit. I get what he's doing here, though, because, like, the idea with the Cosmo is you protect your Darkhawk from the stuff that breaks leader symmetry. It's smart, but I'm too stupid for it.
Yeah, I think that it's an option out there for players that want to be playing cards like Enchantress, like Cosmo, to interact with their opponent. Like, one of the things the Darkhawk deck kind of can't do without some of those cards is interact, right? So you can get blown out by these big these big decks, or these Silver Surfer decks, maybe these Wong decks. Like, you just can't do anything. You see Wong, you're like, I can't really do much about that.
I think that's actually what the Cosmo is for, is just like, he really hated losing to Silver Surfer. Like, it's just like, I can't, because Silver Surfer does go bigger than you, right? Dara's always been bigger on Cosmo in his like mid-range decks than I have. I remember back, I think it was like leaving the beta, his favorite Sarah deck ran not just Shang-Chi and Enchantress, but also Cosmo. And I think that's like, he's always been bigger on like, I'm going to read where they're playing this, and I'm going to win the game off of it with Cosmo. And I have always been less focused on Cosmo as that. And that could be an oversight on my part, frankly.
Well,
But I suspect that it's not just protecting your Darkhawk. It's also just like, man, I really hate Silver Surfer.
Yeah, I'm on your side, where I've been experimenting with this list and been frequently finding myself locking a lane out for me because my Cosmo has turned off my entire deck, and I'm like, oh god. So next up, let's talk about Shuri plus Zabu Control. So Zabu Control tends to have, the Spider-Man Absorbing Man package. Often we'll play Goose as well. Goose does it pairs quite well with Zabu, but then again, you really do need the Zabu if you're going to be playing the Goose. Runs Maximus here, just in case. I guess it doesn't get the Zabu discount, so it can play into that lane. Maximus, obviously a great 3-drop at that. But this package, to me, that's particularly interesting is the Daredevil, the Shuri into Vision. A very powerful interaction that we saw last month as well. And, Shuri obviously will buff Light Queen and Arrow to massive power levels. Have you had any exposure to these sort of quote unquote control lists?
This looks like heat. The gamer in me is like, all right, we cannot play Spider-Man Absorbing Man in any of this stuff, because it's like, that is just like, I would love to win 2 cubes and lose 8. Like that is, I don't know. I like the it's a very strong thing to do that feels very good, but I feel like it never wins you 4 cubes. I have never won 4 cubes with it. I almost wonder if you can't just be like, all right, see, the issue is we want to play like, it would be like Darkhawk Rock Slide there, but Maximus conflicts with that, and we lose like the additional stats from the Maximus, so then we'd have to play something like Thor, which is actually kind of bad because we need to draw all of our cards, so then you're looking at something like Mr. Fantastic, which is like, that's a good card, it's fine, but like a little unexciting. I like it. This deck looks like heat to me. I if you're going to play a Spider-Man Absorbing Man deck, I mean, that's a pretty cool one to play. I do wonder about the efficacy of Shuri Vision if you're not running leader, because like one of the big Vision's upsides is just like it's Dino on wheels, and that makes it really easy to set up leader checkmates, basically.
Yeah. And I think that you could potentially fit a Shang-Chi in here as well if you are looking to be very interactive with the opponent. It's like Shang-Chi's probably one of the more powerful interactive pieces, and it's getting discounted by that Zabu. So probably a potential include. You talked about the cube rate thing, right? Which is something that plagues control decks in Marvel Snap just in general, right? Is that you often finding yourself, winning a cube here, winning a cube there. If you develop an advantage very early, and your deck tends to do that, and it's locking the opponent out of the game, which is kind of what Spider-Man does, it's rare you're going to get a lot of cubes. I actually found that problem. I had a huge problem with that last meta with the Leech Leader deck. I just found that I would win 1 cube all the time, but then that one time when I got a bit overzealous and snapped when I maybe shouldn't have, I would lose 8 cubes, and I was like, I'm not playing this deck. Like, it was so freaking tilting. All right, gonna flash one last deck list here, which is another Zabu Control. Zabu Control 2 as I have it here, but this is a bit on the wild side. So we have Black Widow, we have Wong, obviously the Spider-Man Absorbing Man with Crystal to filter through the deck, Moon Girl to potentially copy those Darkhawks, maybe copy the Spider-Mans as well. Goose, again, Goose is going to be kind of a staple to some of these control decks with the Zabu, because Zabu's going to let you play those bigger cost cards into the Goose lane. And then Mystique, which is interesting, it can copy the Darkhawk, can copy the Zabu. I find that you don't really curve into Mystique very well, so it feels a bit clunky, but having 2 Darkhawks is pretty powerful. What are your thoughts sort of on this? Could you see yourself running some of this? I mean, the Black Widow can be pretty annoying sometimes, but I actually had a bit of success with this list, to be honest. I tried this one and it worked out well for me, surprisingly.
I think there are a few things that I don't like about this. I think Black Widow is chief among them, because the idea here is, we'll buff Darkhawk, right? It's a 2/3 because we get Darkhawk. But like, have you ever considered about what happens if we don't draw Darkhawk? Because, sure, we deny them a draw by playing Black Widow, but we also denied ourselves a draw by putting Black Widow in our deck. Like, I am not a fan. This is like an overriding deck building principle you will see from me every time. Is stop playing bad synergy shit unless you have multiple targets for it. Unless you have multiple reasons to be doing the thing. Because otherwise that card is going to suck, right? When you look at the highest performing Silver Surfer decks, and I actually do take some credit for this, because like the highest performing Silver Surfer decks on SnapFan right now, right? You go to SnapFan, you sort by pool 3+, include deck stats, recent win percentage, sorted by descending. The first 3 decks are all Sarah Surfer decks playing Iceman, Scorpion, and Armor. And that's because they're playing good cards. They're playing good cards, and they're not playing Forge and Nova, because like that's bad. Don't play bad cards, play good cards. I get why you'd want to play Forge. There's synergy with Brood. But what happens if you don't draw Brood? You're playing a 2/3 with no other upside. It sucks. And like you're playing Nova. What happens if you play Nova and don't draw Killmonger? Oh, it's a 1/2. It did nothing. You played Misty Knight, right? Don't play bad cards that have synergy with one card in your deck. Play, if you must do them, you do it for a second reason, right? If you play Black Widow, you're like, all right, there is a deck in the metagame that I really do not want to draw a card, like Hela or something, right? That's when you bring Black Widow into these decks because it has value there and with Darkhawk, right? Mystique. This deck actually does run Goose, and there's like some very fun upside where you go like Goose Mystique. I think that's actually pretty cute. But like a lot of these decks are like not running Goose, and so they're just running Mystique as a Darkhawk target. And it's like, well, you're not going to draw it every game. Like, you're not drawing this card every game. And if you don't draw it, you're just holding this 3/0 that does nothing.
Yeah.
And I think so much of my deck building is, what if we take out the bad synergy pieces and run cards that are good instead of running bad synergy pieces? There's a point at which synergy really matters, right? You look at a Mr. Negative deck. That is a synergy deck. It is a deck built on cards that function with your enabler, right? But there is also a point at which, like, if you don't have multiple synergistic targets, like if you don't have, Mr. Sinister and Brood in your Forge deck, it's gonna suck a lot of the time, or be worse than replacement level a lot of the time. And I think the other thing with people running Brood, this is a tangent. People running Brood in Silver Surfer decks, it's like, what, you needed more power in the Brood lane? Who contests a Brood lane? Like, nobody in their right mind is going to see you play Brood and then be like, yep, that's the lane I'm going into. Like, everyone knows that's 15 power for free, right? Like, nobody's going to do that. You don't need to add the 6 more there, right? And that's the other issue with Forge. Like, these cards that sort of push you into, like, over-investing in weird spots. And I think this deck's actually built... It's the best version of this, like, concept I've seen iterated on, where you're just running a bunch of synergy pieces instead of just good cards. Because at least you have this Goose Mystique thing, which is actually extremely funny and a powerful thing to be doing. But the rest of it, like the rest of these decks that are just running like a Mystique for a Darkhawk, I think that's a mistake.
I saw a lot of Moon Girl in the earlier lists. It's come out since.
That's also a mistake.
It's come out since. It was pretty cheeky with some of the Spider-Man stuff. But yeah,
that is like the definition of a win more.
Well,
because you only play the Moon Girl. The Moon Girl is only ever good if you already played Zabu. In which case, your win rate is already like 65%. Like, you're like, what? You needed to make it go from 65 to 70? What, you were going to lose that game somehow? I don't know.
100%. That's exactly what you talked about with like adding Forge to just increase your equity in the Brood lane just doesn't really make any sense because that's the lane that you're winning. Like, now you have to win the other lane. That's the problem. But yeah. All right.
Yep. That's pretty much it. Like, I that is, of the cute decks I've seen, that's the one I like the most, I think. But that's a pretty low bar. Like, I really want Black Widow to be good. I ran her in Sarah for a long time in the beta because there was a metagame that allowed you to really attack board space. So you'd run like Black Widow, Green Goblin, and Debris, and then you would have the Carnage stuff to clean it up, and you just absolutely dump on other Sarah decks because like they were all trying to do like, I have 3 spaces. I have 1 space left in this lane, and a big Iron Man is going there on turn 7 because I play Magic, and then it's like, no, actually a Rock is going there. Like, there was a lot of room to play around with that in the beta, but that is no longer the case.
All right, well, let's close it out. I think that this kind of goes without saying, but do you think Zabu's here to stay, at least for this season? Yeah,
probably.
Seems like it, right?
I mean, I think it's worse than people think. But I do think it's pretty good.
Yep.
Like, I do think that probably Surfer is going to be a little stronger in the long run. Like, when we look back at these battle passes and it's like, which of the 2 broken battle pass cards was the strongest? Probably Surfer is the one, but that's really just by virtue of getting to play so much interaction, right? Surfer gets to play Killmonger. Surfer gets to play Cosmo. You can even put Rogue in there. Surfer gets to be this sort of aggro control deck, right? Goes big, still interacts, and it interacts cheaply. Even when it doesn't draw Sarah, right? It can still win games. And if it doesn't draw Surfer, it's a little bit screwed, but 75% chance every game. What can you do?
Yeah.
Zabu, I have hopes for. I think the current shells for it are so unrefined. And I guess the fact that like we're running over the ladder with unrefined shells is an indicator that it's probably here to stay. But I hope there's some evolution to be found, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think that both you and I would be share the sentiment that the meta is definitely not solved at this point. We're going to see more refinement in the Zabu decks. We'll probably see other decks creep up to combat it. It hasn't been immensely popular. Like I haven't seen one deck that really comes out swinging. It's just like, oh, this dunks on my Zabu deck. It's the only thing I don't want to play. Like when I'm playing Zabu, the main thing I don't want to play is other Zabu decks at this point. But if you've been, you kind of ended with the Gossip Gill version of the deck. Is there any other cards that you're sort of thinking about that you think could potentially make it in, stuff that you're missing from old versions? Just some cards you could rattle off your head that maybe other people could experiment with.
I think it's less about the 4s that you want to play and more about what your end game wants to be. Leader, worse in this list than he has been in any other list, right? Arrow, also worse, right? Because, ideally you're getting a couple turns of Zabu, but really in the deck I'm playing, you're just doing Zabu into 2 4s into Leader and Arrow, right? And so, I feel like there's room to play around to see if there's a deck you can make that functions with Zabu and without Zabu. And I don't think I'm there yet. I think I tried, but I don't think I'm there. Like, I don't have specific cards in mind, but the end game is the bit that's really gnawing at me, right? Like, because do you want to be a point slam deck or do you want to be an Arrow Leader deck? Is there another card that I could play there that I would feel good playing on 5? Can I win games with just 4-drops? Like, if I just play a million 4-drops, is that enough? Dracula, I think, is the number 1 card I want to name check. It'll add about 4% chance to you drawing Zabu on turn. You'll go from 50% to about 54%, which is not a 4% chance, actually. It's like a 8% chance increase when you think about it like that, I think. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes.
If you know math, I'm sorry. I'm sure I was wrong. It makes you more likely to draw Zabu if you run America Chavez. And Dracula dumping America Chavez is one way to look at this. But the issue that I have with those is you're going to run out of cards. And that's where the Moon Girl stuff actually seems to make sense. But then what happens if you don't draw Dracula and you do draw America Chavez? You're just sitting there with a 6/9 in hand. You're like, wait, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like that is something Dracula Sarah has been a bugaboo of mine forever. I have always wanted it to work. I have never successfully made it happen. And Dracula Zabu is very close to becoming yet another one of those where it's just like, I know this has to be good. That 4% increase, it's so good. But I have no idea if it actually is.
There's a
And I don't know how to
popular deck builder on Twitter and Marvel Snap Zone, Den, who constantly runs America Chavez in his decks. And I think that sometimes when I copy them, it's one of my first cuts. Because the last thing I want to do is be ending up on turn 6 with America Chavez. I'm just like, here's my 6/9 Leader. I'm like,
I mean, there's a decent chance that Den knows something we don't, right? Like, I have a lot of respect for Den as a player. And it's just I get it. I get why he does this, because I want to do this too. I just can't make myself do it. Like, I totally get it. But oh my god, I can't bring myself to do it.
All right. Well, let's close it out there. Week 1 of the Savage Land meta is in flux right now. It does look like Zabu is sort of dominating most of the ladder, but we could see that change pretty quickly. Innovations do crop up, and Zabu could be a targetable deck. We will see. Maybe the patch notes will come out. They could adjust them. I'm not sure, but that leader nerf does. We should expect it to come pretty soon. I'm very excited for friendly battles. The interview with Ben Brode has me pumped for the next month or two of Marvel Snap, because once tournaments hit and friendly battles hit, it. That is a absolute game changer in terms of content and things to do playing the game, especially once you get past infinite rank. So very, very excited for that. There's a video version of this podcast on YouTube if you want to watch that. So youtube.com/@the_snapshot. I'm on Twitter at BrennanAPG, and KM is at KMBestMS, no spaces. Check us out there to continue the convo. And yeah, until next week, we'll see you in the next episode. And I'm excited to kind of hear back on the budget deck experiment you'll be doing over this next week, KM.
So am I. Like, I feel like it is maybe the most important thing I can do for the community right now, because I have always been, I guess not like on the side of second dinner, but at least like way more willing to hear them out than I think a lot of the community is. But this is the first month where I've just been like, oh man, this is actually bad. If this is the best deck, that is really bad for the game. And I need to, I guess, use my platform to disseminate decks that you can actually play this game with before people start leaving because they're losing to Darkhawk or whatever. Like, I need to find decks that you can play into the Darkhawk meta. Even though I understand for 99% of our listeners, you're probably not playing in the Darkhawk meta. Like, I do think that matters. I think it matters because things percolate downwards, right? And so if I can get some good budgetish decks to percolating downwards, then I will.
I got to put that on our notes to the outro, but I actually forgot to mention, tell people where to find you streaming, where you'll be doing that budget deck test this week. Right.
I'll be streaming on Twitch, KMBest MS. That's me. I stream weekdays, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and weekends usually about 2 hours earlier than that. That is the plan coming up. So weekdays 6 p.m. to 10, and then weekends usually about 4 p.m. to 8-ish or 3 p.m. to 7-ish, depending on how I'm feeling. And that is Eastern time. And I actually wanted to ask you something. Are you ever gonna start streaming some Marvel Snap?
We'll see. I don't know. Probably not, because the thing is like, I am so impressed and in awe of your work ethic with streaming the hours that you do and the consistency that you do it. Like, that's incredible. I don't know if I'm that person, at least not right now. Maybe in the future. I'm definitely, though, Cam, I'm definitely going to be in the tournaments. I will be in the tournament scene. I will be grinding the tournament scene. That is absolutely what I want to be doing in Marvel Snap. Streaming, we'll see. But I'm happy to be podcasting and to be dominating some tournaments in the future.
Gotcha. We'll have to put together like an actual testing group once Marvel Snap actually has tournaments.
Super excited.
Like I know a couple of the killers from my old Magic testing group ended up playing Snap right now. So like there are several people who I know for a fact are better than me at card games that I'm hoping to enlist so they can boost me. That's really what I'm trying to get done here.
Can't wait for it. All right, we thank you everybody for listening to this week's episode. We'll see y'all next week. And cheers.